Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're looking at a bunch of killer doll movies, creepy doll movies. It's all dolls. I'm going to basically break down a bunch of these movies, some popular, some you may have never heard of, but all of them are interesting. Full disclaimer, this list was much longer initially, but I wanted to give each movie their due, so this could have a part 2 down the road for sure. Either way, I think this serves as a pretty good jumping off point if you're interested in creepy doll films, so let's hop into it. Annabelle. Annabelle is probably the most well-known and popular creepy doll movie of the last decade. It's an offshoot of the Conjuring movie in which the doll was briefly featured. So here's the gist of it. A young couple, John and Mia, are expecting their first child. John buys a doll as a gift for the future baby. One night, unexpectedly, John and Mia's neighbors are attacked by their estranged daughter Annabelle and boyfriend who are part of a cult. Annabelle makes her way into the couple's house and cuts her own throat while holding the doll in the nursery room. A couple of strange things happen here and there after this, but stuff gets really weird after they have the baby and move into an apartment building. At this point, Mia is straight up attacked by a demon in the building, which is probably the creepiest scene in the whole movie. So eventually this demon straight up reveals itself while manipulating the doll, and it turns out that this demon attached itself to the doll when that psycho cultist killed herself. So like any supernatural ghost movie, they call a priest to come help. So this dude tells them all about the demon and how it wants the soul of their daughter, and so eventually Mia attempts to kill herself, but is stopped by John and Evelyn. Evelyn, by the way, is a fellow tenant in the building, and she ends up sacrificing her own soul and jumps out of the window with the doll killing herself. They leave the ending open when we see a woman buying the doll from a store. But that's basically it. I mean, that's really the whole movie. It's a little overrated in my book. There's a couple of jump scares, but that's kind of it. I mean, I like paranormal movies and all that, but this one just isn't very original, and honestly, I'm probably just bitter because I want a killer doll movie where a doll actually kills people. In Annabelle, it's just a demon that sometimes moves the doll, but most of the scary scenes don't even show the doll. It's just the demon. So honestly, for the most popular creepy doll movie in a while, this doll isn't even that creepy, and it's not even used that much. Anyway, I'm probably just being a douche, so moving on. The Boy. The Boy is one of the more recent entries on this list and is probably one of the more unique ones. It's about an old couple who hire a nanny, Greta, to look after their son while they're on holiday. Things get weird very quickly when Greta arrives and finds out that the son they're referring to is a doll named Brahms. I don't know about you, but when I hear Brahms, I just think about ice cream. Well, at first she laughs, thinking this is some kind of joke or something, but she soon realizes that this old crazy couple really does treat this thing like their son. Greta just goes with it as they walk her through a list of rules on how to care for Brahms, which includes waking him up and changing him into daytime clothes, reading to him in a loud and clear voice, playing music for him, and giving him a goodnight kiss. So yeah, it's already getting kind of creepy. But once this couple leaves, Greta just ignores the doll and its rules. Her only real contact is the local delivery man, Malcolm, who drops off Greta's payments. He's aware of Brahms and tells Greta about the backstory, which is the fact that the old couple actually did have a son that died in a house fire 20 years ago. The concept is intriguing, but it is a bit slow at the beginning. About 40 minutes into the movie, we finally get more spookiness as Greta's lured into the attic after hearing a strange noise. Then she gets locked in and isn't let out until the morning. Things intensify after this as Greta begins hearing a child's sobs coming from the house and the doll seemingly moving on its own. It all comes to a head, however, when Greta receives a phone call from a little boy addressing her by name and asking her why she's not following the rules. So she locks her room and hangs up the phone, but now we can see the presence of somebody outside of her door speaking to her in the same voice as the little boy on the phone. After this instance, Greta begins following the rules, believing the spirit of the boy to be possessing the doll. Okay, so in order to explain the rest of this film, I'm going to have to spoil some major stuff here, so go ahead and skip ahead to the next timestamp if you don't want any big spoilers. This is one of those movies where there's a big twist, so I just don't want to spoil it if you're interested in watching it. Okay, so in the final act of the film, a lot of stuff all happens at once, but basically Greta's psycho ex-boyfriend just shows up to the house, who she specifically was trying to get away from. He stays in the house that night and wakes up to a message, "Get out," written in blood, which drips on his face. At this point, Malcolm shows up and the ex-boyfriend goes full psycho, assuming Malcolm and Greta did it, and he breaks the doll. Well, this is where shit hits the fan as the walls begin to shake, culminating in the ex-boyfriend being knocked the fuck out by an unknown force behind a mirror. That unknown force is none other than Brahms. Not the doll, but the 30-year-old man-child who's been living in the walls of the house. Yeah, that's the big twist, so it's pretty good for what it is. Basically, the old geezers weren't just looking for a nanny to take care of Brahms the doll, but a mate for Brahms the actual living human. His appearance is pretty disturbing as he wears a porcelain mask that matches the doll's over his face and uses the childlike voice we heard previously in the film. So a creepy chase ensues after he stabs the ex-boyfriend in the neck with a shard of porcelain glass. Eventually, this chase ends with Malcolm being severely injured and Greta stabbing Brahms with a screwdriver. It then ends with Greta and Malcolm leaving the property as we see the doll being put back together by who we can assume is a surviving Brahms. It's a cool twist and ending, but I'm not sure it's worth the payoff after sitting through an hour and a half of very little action. On one hand, I think the whole idea is very original, and on the other hand, there's that B-movie trash side of me that just wants to see the doll killing people, so to each his own. There's a sequel to this one, which I haven't seen, but I am curious how they can make this work after the big reveal since the whole movie was riding on it. Dolly, Dearest. Dolly, Dearest was a grief household classic when I was a kid, right up there with Child's Play. It's not as good as Child's Play by a long shot, but it's really the only other killer doll movie I'd seen at the time. The movie feels heavily inspired by both Child's Play and The Exorcist because the film starts out with an archaeological dig site and an ancient evil spirit being released. That evil spirit finds refuge in the body of a doll, of course. So let me give you the rundown. Basically, a family's moving to Mexico because the father buys a doll factory. His daughter, Jessica, finds a doll in the factory and he lets her keep it, not knowing, of course, that it's possessed by an evil spirit. So pretty quickly, the daughter starts acting weird and having conversations with the doll, you know, the usual stuff. Eventually, we get our first victim, the housekeeper. Why do housekeepers always get the short end of the stick in these movies? Anyway, the doll, who's called Dolly, pushes her down the basement stairs and then electrocutes her. The next victim is the night watchman at the factory. This is the most memorable kill to me because several dollies attack him, and at one point his hand gets stuck in a sewing machine and it simultaneously stabs and sews up his hand. Pretty gnarly. So at this point, Dolly is like semi-possessing the daughter, Jessica, as well, and she's acting like a total psycho. When the mom tries to take Dolly from her, she starts screaming, "I'll kill you, I'll kill you." It's like, damn, send her ass to foster care. Anyway, there's some frightening scenes after this point, but not really any more kills. There's a big scene where the dad is attacked by several of the dolls who try to pull him into a large machine, but he's saved at the last minute. One of the things that's interesting about this movie and separates it from Chucky is that the spirit controls several dolls at once. Although I guess Chucky does do that in Cult of Chucky a bit, but that's like one movie. The other thing that happens is the longer the dolls are possessed, the more evil and monster-like their faces look. They eventually seal the tomb and the spirit is sent away and the family survives and all that fun stuff. I do have to mention the best scene in the movie, which is when Dolly's threatening the mom and sister, and the brother, who's maybe like 12, aims a shotgun at her and says, "Play with this, bitch," before blasting her ass through the door. It's hilarious and worth looking up on YouTube, even if you don't see the full movie. So, Dolly, Dearest. It's kind of a poor man's Chucky, but still a fun B-movie to check out if you're into that horror trash like I am. My only complaint overall is that it's not gory enough. There's not really enough kills, but I guess I'm just a sick bastard, what can I say? Puppet Master. Puppet Master is one of the most classic killer doll movies, and I'd actually never seen it till now. The movie starts off both hilarious and confusing as this old creepy puppet maker's chilling in a hotel in California. He's talking to a couple of dolls as he packs them up and hides them in the wall. While this is going on, two Nazis slowly make their way up to kill him, and a puppet's running around the hotel on its own free will. When the Nazis enter the room, the puppet master just shoots himself in the head, spraying the wall behind him with blood. Weird but intriguing start, I gotta say. So fast forward like 60 years in the future, and we find out that a psychic named Gallagher is staying at the same hotel and is studying the old puppet master's work when he mysteriously shoots himself. 4 of his psychic colleagues become aware of this in various ways. They all show up to the hotel and are greeted by Gallagher's wife, Megan. From there, the psychics are slowly picked off by murderous puppets. We see hints of the puppets here and there, but the first time we really see one of them move is when one of them crawls out of Gallagher's coffin. It actually made me laugh out loud because this puppet is named Pinhead, and for good reason. His head is the size of a big toe, and his arms are just straight up human arms, so watching him crawl out was unexpected, and he instantly became my favorite. Anyway, he actually gets our first kill as he whacks the housekeeper with a fire poker. It's a very underwhelming death because it just looks like he barely taps her with it, then we see blood spray on the fireplace and it cuts away. Next we see 2 of the psychics get taken out, and I'm glad because they're easily the most annoying characters in the entire film. They're a couple who start having loud sex in the hotel, which is annoying everyone else, when a few puppets make their way into the room. Well, the lady freaks and starts looking under the bed while the guy's tied to the bedpost and blindfolded. While she looks under the bed, we're introduced to another puppet named the Tunneler. He basically looks like a baby but with a giant drill drill on his head. Well, he pops out and drills into the girl's face, although it cuts away so we don't see anything. The next puppet, Leech Woman, looks kind of like a Barbie and starts licking at the blindfolded guy's nipple, which is just gross. So he thinks it's his lover and he gets really into it, which is just all around really disturbing. But then she earns her name as she starts regurgitating leeches out of her mouth onto the guy until he dies from lack of blood. The way her face stretches as she pukes out the leeches is what makes this the most unsettling scene in my opinion, although it's not the most graphic by far. Shortly after, a fortune teller psychic is chased down by Pinhead after he breaks her leg. This sequence is awesome because Pinhead straight up just starts punching her in the face, which is extra satisfying because this lady was really being an a-hole earlier in the movie. Plus, she carries around and talks to a taxidermy dog, so that's weird. Anyway, she eventually throws Pinhead off, but that's before Blade, who's the main puppet, or at least it feels that way, shows up and cuts her throat. So now we're down to one psychic, Alex, who sees the future in his dreams, and Megan, the widow. As they attempt to leave the hotel, they run into Gallagher. Turns out the dude used the reanimation magic of the puppet master to reanimate himself into his own body rather than a puppet. He goes on a spiel about being immortal and in the process starts insulting his puppet minions. Well, here's a little hint for the guy, don't insult killer puppets. They all start attacking Gallagher. First, Pinhead locks him in an elevator and Tunneler drills a hole in his leg. So he tries to escape by jumping through a hole in the ceiling when Blade shows up and cuts off his fingers, which starts spraying green blood for whatever reason. Anyway, he falls to the ground where Pinhead holds his head steady while Leech Woman pukes a giant leech into his mouth and Tunneler drills a hole into his neck. Alex and Megan just watch it in horror as this all happens, and it eventually cuts to the next day where the sun's shining, all seems good and well, and Alex is saying his goodbyes as he heads out the door. As Megan heads upstairs, we see her pick up the taxidermy dog from earlier, and when she sets it down on the ground, it runs away. I guess that's hinting at the fact that Megan now holds the Puppet Master's powers. But yeah, that's Puppet Master. It's honestly pretty interesting. Like most movies of this type, it takes about a half hour before we see a kill, but then it picks up in entertainment, so overall not too shabby. It's also worth mentioning that there are like 8 Puppet Master sequels, so that might be worth a video in itself. Dolls. Dolls might be the gem of the bunch to me because I had low expectations while watching it, and it really was a pleasant surprise. It follows 2 groups of people who get stuck in a storm and seek shelter at a nearby mansion. The first group consists of a little girl, Judy, her bitchy stepmother, and her a-hole dad. You might think I'm being harsh, but honestly, these 2 are dirtbags. The film starts as the family's car gets stuck in the mud, and they make their way to the mansion. Right off the bat, the stepmother's just being the worst by throwing Judy's stuffed teddy bear into the woods. The charm of the movie sets in here as Judy imagined her teddy bear transforming into a huge monster-like bear and eating her stepmom. It really made me laugh and was a good way of showing a little horror before the real action happens. So they break into the house and are greeted by a strange old couple, a doll maker and his wife. They welcome the family into the warm house, but you can tell something spooky's going on here. Shortly after, the second group of people show up. This group consists of Ralph, a lovable doofus, and 2 punk rock chicks he picked up as hitchhikers. The old couple welcome them to stay as well. The doll maker has a strange conversation with both Ralph and Judy about the magic of childhood. He gives Judy a doll named Mr. Punch to keep her company and encourages Ralph to follow his inner child. Once everyone's settled into their rooms for the night, the spooky shit starts happening. We learn that the hitchhikers were planning on robbing Ralph and decide they could steal from the house now too. One of the girls sneaks off to snag some jewelry, but it seems like the dolls are watching her. It's not even really subtle. I mean, this movie straight up shows their creepy eyeballs moving. For the first attack of the movie, this one's a little underwhelming because we don't actually see the dolls. Even though we can't see them, it's clear that they've grabbed the girl and start bashing her head into the wall like a battering ram. Eventually they throw her ass into the hallway where Judy finds her bloodied up head before they drag her down the hall. So this poor traumatized little girl goes and tells her parents, and they're complete dicks about it. I mean, they just assume she's lying. The dad even threatens to hit her, but the stepmom stops him and says he'll just have to pay more child support. See what I mean? Assholes. So Judy tells Ralph and they start searching around for the missing girl. When the parents and the other punk chick find Ralph with blood on his hands, they start accusing him of doing something to her, and worse, the dad calls him a pervert and to stay away from Judy, who runs away. The dad goes looking for her, and in the meantime, the stepmother gets what's coming to her. This is probably the most iconic death in the movie, and maybe that's just because she's so hateable. So it's satisfying to see her die. A swarm of dolls starts going at her. One takes a bite out of her arm in gory detail, and the others keep trying to cut off her limbs with saws. There's some pretty cool stop motion here as the dolls lunge at her. Eventually she escapes into the hall and finds her path blocked by dolls. She then attempts to jump over them, and she jumps too far and flies out the window to her death. It doesn't really make sense, but I'm not going to question it. Next, we have the other punk girl looking for her friend. She manages to find her, and her friend's been turned partially into a doll. This is one of the creepiest effects in the movie, as she's still life-size but with a weird doll-like face. Anyway, her plastic eyes pop out and dolls come out to attack. So this girl actually puts up the best fight in the movie, smashing and stomping quite a few dolls. As she breaks the dolls, we see weird mummy-like remains inside of them. She escapes the room, but is greeted with a firing squad of toy soldiers who light her ass up, and I guess the bullets are real as blood sprays from the holes. Last but not least is Judy's dad. He finds his stepmother's corpse with half her head missing and decides it was Ralph, so he grabs a hunk of wood and goes on a hunt for him. When Ralph discovers the dolls are really alive, he freaks out and they attack him, but Judy asks them to stop and they oblige. A fight between Ralph and the dad follows, in which Ralph and Judy both get knocked out. Finally, Mr. Punch, the doll given to Judy earlier, attacks the dad, who smashes Mr. Punch's head. The doll maker and his wife show up and explain that this isn't the first time they've had guests, and that the dolls choose who's still a child at heart and who has become a bitter adult. The doll maker then turns the dad into a new Mr. Punch, and the transformation is pretty cool. The next day, the old couple tells Judy that her dad and stepmother have left, leaving her and Ralph a plane ticket back to Boston so she can live with her mother. Ralph isn't quite buying the whole story, but takes Judy and they drive off. I think what I liked about this one is that it has a lot of qualities of like a darker kids movie like James and the Giant Peach or Witches or something like that, but at the same time it's an R-rated killer doll movie. So check it out. Magic. Magic is about a magician, Corky, who can't get a break in the business when his mentor tells him he needs a new gimmick for his act. Well, that's when he introduces Fats, a ventriloquist dummy, and his career starts taking off. Only problem is Fats is the side effect of a personality disorder in Corky, and he begins to act as if Fats is actually another person. He gets a great opportunity to be on television, but turns it down because it requires a medical examination, and his manager gets pissed off. So Corky moves back to his hometown and rents a cabin to try and rethink his career. While there, he rekindles a relationship with his high school crush, Peggy. Unfortunately, she's married to one of his best friends, Duke. While pursuing Peggy, his relationship with Fats is getting more and more dark and disturbing, taking on a self-abuse aspect. His manager shows up to check on him and demands that he makes Fats shut up for 5 minutes. Well, Fats doesn't take too kindly to that and convinces Corky to kill him. And he does by bludgeoning him with the ventriloquist doll's hardwood head. Well, Fats doesn't take too kindly to that and convinces Corky to kill the manager. And he does so by bludgeoning him with Fats' hardwood head. Then while dragging his body into the nearby lake, the manager wakes up so Corky drowns the poor bastard. Pretty soon Duke ends up finding the manager's body and starts getting suspicious, so he starts searching Corky's cabin, and before you know it, he gets stabbed by Fats. With Corky's help, of course. Now that the friend's out of the way, Corky tries convincing Peggy to run away with him, but she ends up getting pissed off. At this point, Fats says he's in control of Corky's life and demands he kill Peggy. Well, Corky returns to Fats with a bloody knife. Turns out, however, that the blood is his. The dude took himself out Harikiri style rather than kill the lady. So the doll starts feeling woozy as well, and they have a little conversation as they lay dying, wondering who will die first, which is both hilarious and tragic. This is an interesting one, and it does star Anthony Hopkins in an earlier role, so it might be worth checking out if you're a fan. The Pit. The Pit is a really cool horror film from 1981 that I wish I'd heard of earlier. I'll admit I'm being a little loose on killer doll movie here because it's a teddy bear and it's not the teddy bear that's killing anybody, but I had to include it because it's interesting as hell. So 12-year-old Canadian boy Jamie gets made fun of by basically everyone he meets, including adults, because he's just a little weird. Turns out he's not just awkward though, he's actually insane. He has a teddy bear that he carries around and has full conversations with, and as the viewers we actually hear Teddy's voice, which I kind of like because a lot of times you get the cliche where you only hear the reality of the one-sided conversation, but I like hearing the creepy voice. Besides talking to inanimate objects, Jamie also has an unhealthy obsession with women. His parents go out of town and leave him with a babysitter who he has the hots for, and this perv is not afraid of letting her know. He does a series of perverted things like spying on her naked, asking her to wash him in the tub, and then making creepy comments about it. Oh, and he also pretends to drop a napkin under the table at dinner so that he can stare at her panties while retrieving it. So yeah, this kid is really creepy, but that's not even the real horror of the film. Turns out the kid has a pit hidden in the woods that's filled with goblin-like creatures that he calls trogs, and he's been feeding them raw meat. At first he takes money from his mom's purse to buy meat from the store, but eventually his teddy bear tells him to bring all his bullies and tormentors to the pit and feed them to the trogs. And so the kid does it. So there's this little kid whose teddy bear is telling him to feed innocent people to a pit of goblins, basically. I mean, that's freaking awesome. So he eventually shows the babysitter the pit, and he's not intending to push her in because he's in love with her, but she accidentally slips and falls in, and most of the time it cuts away when people fall in, but this time we get to see the trogs eating her, so that's cool. The kid's upset, of course, and he just lets the trogs out of the pit, and this is where the film goes into an interesting direction because the trogs begin terrorizing the countryside, and a militia forms to take them out. I guess I just didn't expect it to get that large a scale. At the end, Jamie goes to live with his grandparents, and he meets a girl named Alicia who wants to be friends. Well, that seems all sweet, but it turns out Alicia has a little pit of her own and pushes Jamie into it. That's a pretty cool ending, I gotta say. So despite having that 80s B-movie feel, the actual concept here is really cool, so yeah, that's the pit. Black Devil Doll from Hell. Black Devil Doll from Hell obviously stood out to me when compiling this list, and so I decided to check it out, and man, I'm glad I did. Apparently the director, Chester Novel Turner, filmed it over the course of several years on a budget of around $10,000, and I have no idea what that money was spent on because this is one of the lowest quality films I think I've ever seen. It looks like it was just filmed on a home camcorder. I don't want to knock it too much for that because you know I respect the hell out of people who just decide to make their own damn movie. That being said, let me walk you through Black Devil Doll from Hell. The film starts with a woman leaving church as a man tries to sell her stolen goods from the back of his car. She quickly starts giving him a lecture about how stealing's wrong, and it's in the Bible. Then she heads home and talks to her friend on the phone as the camera zooms in on religious imagery in her home. The conversation is hilarious though as she complains about men while her friend tells her she's gonna get her laid. I actually thought she was an old lady up until this scene because of the way she acts. So next we see her at a local antique store or something, and she sees a doll, the Black Devil Doll from Hell, we can only presume, when the store owner gives her a dramatic story about how the doll's been bought and returned 4 times previously and that the doll can give the owner their deepest desire. So she takes it home and starts taking a shower when, well, to be frank, all of a sudden it felt like I was watching a naughty movie or something because this godly woman starts getting all freaky with herself in the shower. This is the first time we see any movement from the devil doll who slowly turns its head. So she leaves the shower and the doll jumps on her and attacks her, although it's through a series of still images, and for some reason the doll is now played by a little kid. It's like clearly a kid in an outfit that looks like the doll's. Yeah, I don't know, it's bonkos, man. So I figure at this point on, we would see a series of deaths all caused by this freaky little dude, and it would turn into a typical no-budget slasher, but the movie goes a direction after this that I could not anticipate at all. The doll has sex with her. So it turns out that the reason she got all horny all of a sudden is that the doll brought out her most inner desire, which is what the shopkeeper said, and it turns out that that inner desire was dick. Anyway, she's squirming and worming in bed when the devil doll says, "I'm gonna give you a lesson in pleasure, but first a lesson in pain." So then a bunch of smoke comes out of his mouth for whatever reason, and he starts going down on her, before eventually she just straight up asks him to bang her. I feel really gross after watching that puppet sex, to be honest. So the rest of the movie is literally her banging different guys, hoping that they can satisfy her the same way the puppet did, but to no avail, so she eventually starts begging the doll for it, and his eyes turn white and she starts bleeding from her eyeballs and dies. No, for real, that's the movie. Anyway, there's a sort of epilogue where we see the shop owner selling the doll to yet another poor woman, and that's Black Devil Doll from Hell. You happy? Okay, so I know you guys are wondering, where the hell's Chucky? How could you make a video about killer dolls without talking about the OG of it all, Chucky? Well, I am going to talk about Chucky. In fact, my next video will be a follow-up to this one where I break down every single Chucky movie from Child's Play 1988 to Cult of Chucky all the way up to the remake that came out in 2019. So tune in next week for that, and I have to say thanks once again for the subs. I was just thanking you guys for 200 subscribers last week, and now I'm past 350. I mean, what the hell? So anyway, I'm just blown away by all the support, and I just want to keep making cool content and hopefully better and better content. So thank you guys for everything. As always, this is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.